especially in the judiciary.
So that's a failure.
Yes.
On the issue of national security, to your point about how is he managing his administration, I mean, folks I speak to in the White House say, look, on domestic policy and economic policy, it's chaotic. They're not going to match that. On national security issues, he seems the president seems strikingly deferential to McMaster, Mattis, Kelly.
In an area where he had no experience,
right?
He's deferred to people who did have experience.
So when they were dealing with Syria, he was saying, "Show me options, show me options, show me options." They gave him a range of options, asked a lot of questions, back to back meetings. The interagency process actually worked there; it was tight, and he actually chose the most cautious option they presented to him. So on the national security front, he seems to sort of respect expertise that's not his own and boundaries.
No. But on the economic issue, Philip, he also has Gary Cohn in the White House. Right. He has his Mnuchin at Treasury. He has other people, the Secretary of Commerce, wading in on economic issues. So there are multiple heads speaking to that.
Yeah, I mean, and I think we saw an early test of his ability to actually affect economic change with the health care bill, which I think did not go well. And I think in part that was simply because he didn't have a lot of ownership over it. They sort of retroactively tried to take ownership over the bill. We're going to see a big test coming up this week. He's going to announce his tax reform package, apparently, according to it's going to be a 15% tax rate for corporations in the United States. That'll be a big lift, and I think that there's probably going to be more support from Republicans for that than you might expect. But that's going to be a good test of the extent to which Donald Trump, who the point that was just made, this is an area where he said, I can get the job done. This is my wheelhouse. This is what I can do. It's going to be a big test of that, and I think that he showed during the health care fight that he has trouble figuring out how to manage Congress and get Congress pointed in the right direction. I think this will be the second big challenge to that extent.
He also pulled out a TPP, but I mean that was a simple thing to do. Glenn, so what about health care legislation? Can he make a deal with the Freedom Caucus? Can he somehow quiet the ranks in the Republican Party and get a health care bill passed?
Well, I think it's pretty unlikely. A lot of the pressure to do this is coming from his Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, who, as everyone knows, is very close to House Speaker Paul Ryan. Both of them took it mutually on the chin during this. Priebus, his position is somewhat more secure than it was in the White House, but he's still not a very powerful Chief of Staff at all, so he's staking a lot on reviving the health care thing. I think it's very unlikely, and in order to get it through the Freedom Caucus, he is going to have to get rid of the pre-existing conditions provisions, and this is a one-house bill. We're talking about the potential of passing this, jamming it through the House, having members walk the plank on it, and only to have it killed in the Senate. So I think that is a really difficult situation for him. And as we know, there's a knock-on effect because they were hoping to achieve $1 trillion worth of savings off of that so that they could then roll it in to the tax cuts. So now what they have to do is come up with $1 trillion or do some serious deficit spending, which is an anathema to some of the other folks in the House. Wherever he goes is the point here. He finds somebody blocking his way. There's a reason there's been gridlock in Washington. And I agree with Hugh about the president's changing the general tone of the place. But in terms of figuring out how to actually get this stuff done, and remember, this is a guy now whose party controls absolutely everything in Washington. It was funny, you know, we're hearing people today talk about the Schumer shutdown. The Republicans are trying to push this notion that Chuck Schumer and the Democrats are going to stop this train from leaving the station. I think right now it's not just a test for the president, but for the Republicans, who, after all, are the dominant ruling party in Washington, D.C.
Well, look, I agree with Glenn. If you compare this period to Barack Obama, President Obama had a unified Democratic Party and obviously a very organized opposition. Trump has a completely disunited, ununited Republican Party.
But he controls all sectors of government.
Controls all sectors, but they're at war with each other, and it's partly because President Trump didn't really run on a conservative agenda. So everyone is trying to figure out where they fit in this new Republican Party that's being led by Donald Trump. And it's many things, but it is not movement conservatism as we've known it for the last 30 years.
On Syria, Hugh, obviously that was a successful strike in terms of limited goal. The goal was to stop them from using chemical weapons. On the other hand, people point out that there's no strategy. And there's no real knowledge of where to go from here, except for the fact that the president has said, you know, I don't want to get involved in the Syrian civil war. That's not what I want to do.
Well, I think we saw Secretary Mattis in Afghanistan this morning, and H.R. McMaster following him there if he's not there already, as they prepare a Syria plan for the president, which I expect him fully to adopt. And I do believe he's going to get the military plus up above the $54 billion that Mick Mulvaney asked for if a continuing resolution passes. I'm one of those Republicans who are calling it the Chuck Schumer shutdown because it takes 60 votes to pass a continuing resolution. And if there's any border security, any border wall in the CR, Senator said he will shut it down. The strategy, I think, has to be, Charlie, first, restock the shells. President Obama left the Department of Defense barren. 60% of our F-18s are judged not ready to fly. We've only got 10 carriers that are deployable right now. The Japanese defense forces are sending destroyers out with the Carl Vinson to the Korean Peninsula. The cupboard is bare, so we got to plus up that defense budget. That will be a big win for me in these 100 days if it comes through the CR. But if Chuck Schumer wants to shut down the government over the wall, I think the Democrats, we should talk about them in the 100 days. They have really moved to the left, and I think part of what we're seeing is the Bernie Sanders effect on the Democratic Party is going to be part of the legacies of these 100 days, is that they've gone way to the left in 100 days.
North Korea is his biggest challenge.
President Obama was handing the transition off to the incoming administration. Apparently, he and his team warned the incoming administration that this was it. This was the sleeper problem that could consume his administration. If there was one problem they felt that they didn't address that they would have, it was getting a handle on North Korea.
Because the President Obama had a philosophy. They thrive if you pay a lot of attention to him. We don't pay any attention.
Correct. Don't make a lot of noise, and then they won't make a lot of noise. The people around President Trump have been forward-leaning, just like as they were on Syria. They've been forward-leaning on North Korea. They are not interested in just ratcheting things down. They are ratcheting things up.
I think General Mattis said the days of strategic patience are over.
Right. And I think that, you know, there's potentially some, again, I don't want to overstate it, but there's some early progress in that regard, and especially getting China on point here is no small thing. I mean, when people say President Trump flipped on the currency manipulation, which, again, I get that all these flips are a little, you know, you can get whiplash trying to keep track of them. However, it was probably in response to the fact that the Chinese government for the first time was sending ships back, coal ships. It's the only thing that North Koreans export to China is coal, and they were sending ships were sending back. So
keep your coal.
So, first time. I mean, noose was starting to tighten, and so was this directly connected to the president's diplomacy? I don't know, but it certainly seems like more than a coincidence.
China has certainly begun to pay attention.
Correct.
Yeah. Other than foreign policy, one of the things that was said about President Obama is that there was great reservation about his will after the Red Line stuff, and especially among the Arab countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, and others. Where does Donald Trump stand on that? And well, is that a plus or a minus or wait to be?
Well, I mean, I think that Donald Trump has shown that he is willing to take action that without reservation to some extent. I mean, certainly, I mean, we made the point earlier that he is sitting down and talking with his foreign policy experts and making decisions based on that. But he is not showing the same lack of willingness to enter into foreign policy challenges, to tackle those challenges. I mean, to the point around North Korea, yes. He said on the campaign trail, for example, that he was going to make China deal with this issue. And it seems as though he has, to some extent, actually gotten China to wrap their hands around it more than Barack Obama was willing to do. He has, I think one of the things that he managed to do on the campaign trail is portray himself as a sort of different sort of foreign policy person than he is going to be as president. He sort of talked about himself as being hands-off and leaving it up to other people, but he has shown a willingness to actually dive in a way that Barack Obama didn't.
Charlie, people on the, just to that point, people on the conservative foreign policy right, people I hang out with, are all excited to claim Trump now as a neocon. You know, he's showing he's willing to engage in the Middle East. He's willing to use force. The truth is, he's not a neocon, but he's also not an isolationist. People who thought that he was going to be an isolationist, me included,